Thank you very much. What's this? Okay, recorded. Yeah.
Yeah, the recording.
Great. Okay, so thank you, and thank you all for coming. So we're currently working on this paper. So we have a working paper up, but we are reworking it now, and then we're going to submit it. So all questions and comments and feedback is very much appreciated. Also from you guys on the room. So this is your work with Emma von Essen. So she is an economist by training, but she's currently at the Department of Sociology at Uppsala University. So let's get going. So what is this paper? Oh, can I? Yes, thank you. So basically, we are looking at the Swedish website flashback.org. I don't know how many of you that are familiar with that site, but if you're from Sweden, you probably have heard of it at least. So basically, it's an infamous or famous, but sort of infamous Swedish website, which typically requires anonymity of the users. And on this site, it's really broad in terms of topics, so you can find almost any content you want. So there are political discussions on politics, drugs, computer support. You can find discussions of prostitutes in Denmark and a lot more. Sport, recent criminal cases, and so on. So it's sort of a Swedish version of Reddit, but it's all in Swedish. And unlike Reddit, it's all organized by. Let's get to that later on. It's a bit different, but it's in essence it's similar. And this is the infamous part then. So it's sort of infamous for a lot of hate, racism, and misogyny. In particular on regarding discussions on politics and recent criminal cases, I think. And the neat thing about this site then, for a research perspective, perhaps not from a user perspective, is that on September 10, 2014, a group of journalists known as Researchgruppen suddenly claimed that they had the knowledge or the data of the identities behind the accounts at flashback.org. And that was on confusion and so on. And then it was, after a while, it was clear that it was users registered before March 2007 that was in this data that they had access to. So those users, they had their personal numbers or their social security numbers, and then they can link that to your name and so on. So basically, they knew the identities of these users. And then subsequently, a handful of users were exposed in national news in February 2015. I think it was 4 or 5 users that had their hateful. And it was also related to hate. So what they had written was sort of exposed in the news and who they were. And at this point in time, then Flashback, the owner of Flashback, confirmed that was the users registered before March 2007 that were at the risk of exposure. And as I said, some users were publicly exposed. Some politicians in particular lost their jobs. And some of the exposed were associated with the right-wing populistic party, so the Sweden Democrats. I should also say that and the event was common knowledge at the time, so it was covered in the national news. I think Aftonbladet was one of the newspapers that exposed these users. I should also say that there have been a few subsequent exposed users afterwards, like there's been one every other year or so, something like that. But those are not discussed as part of this initial leak. But if you look at the, they write in the news article that exposes a user, then the username is usually present. And then if you go to that, go to that username in the data, then you can see that, oh, they are registered for what it states. So those exposed afterwards seems to be part of this initial leak. It's just that it's not clearly stated. Yes.
There's a question in Zoom. Is being anonymous online a major cause for cyberbullying?
So that's what we're trying to answer, I suppose. So we're going to look at how the content of these exposed users, what they write, changes afterwards. So I don't know familiar, but I know that most of you do quantitative stuff, or maybe all of you, but I don't know how used you are to these econometric specifications, but it's going to be a difference in difference, basically. So we're going to look at the change of these exposed users compared to the non-exposed users. That's going to be the thing we look at. And then we're trying to interpret that as sort of decreased anonymity. There is some research that is more correlational that suggests that online environments are a lot more hateful. So online anonymous environments, I should say. Yes. So this figure is basically to show you that that people notice this event, or that people were aware of this. So this first panel here, panel A, now the title is covered a bit, but this is Google Trend searches, so relative searches of the terms research group and a flashback. Can I get rid of this thing?
I think you can move it even further to the top.
Yeah, or down.
This
Or
one?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't optimal either. But
Oh, no. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it will have to stay. In any case, so this is the relative. So this one, 100, this one spike, that's the largest one, and everything else is related in relationship to that. So how many in terms of share of that? And this is then the week of the first statement, so September 10, 2014, that week. And this is the week in February when the news were broken, so when they were exposed in the news. So early February 2015. And this is the same thing, but for the number of news articles containing the keywords flashback and research group. So this is September 2014, so this is monthly data. But this is September 2014, and this is February 2015. Okay, and then so people seem to notice this, and then there was a thread at flashback as well, where the owner confirmed that the users registered before March 2007 were the ones exposed, and also claiming that we have now increased security, so this should not happen again. And then there was a discussion afterwards. So we read the first 4 pages, I think, of this discussion afterwards, but it goes on for several hundred pages or thousands. So we can't read all of them, but we just picked an example here. So this is one user that is at the risk of being exposed, that's sort of asking to either delete the old accounts or to censor them or to remove the old content. Yes.
There's another question on Zoom. Was it random who were exposed, or did research Gruppen target specific individuals in their investigation?
No, they for sure target specific individuals. And they were quite few. So we're focusing on not the exposed, but the sort of risk of exposure. So if you were in this group, then you risk exposure. And we will show you some evidence regarding who's changing their behavior. So it seems to be those that are the most risk of being exposed that change the behavior.
I have basically the same question. So I guess this was targeted against those who had the hate language and so on.
Yeah. So if I skip ahead of it, then we're seeing that the decreased activity by users, and in particular by users that have a higher share of hateful content written prior to the event. So, yes.
How many users were under risk? So how many users were actually registered before March 27, relevant to the whole pool of such users?
So it depends. We will have 2 data sets, but maybe we can return to that question. So it's
Maybe you can give a rough indication. It would be very easier to think through what you're talking about.
So we have a balanced panel of users that write something both before and after the event, and among those, I think it's like 15% that were in the exposed group, and we have an unbalanced panel, and among those, I think it's like 8%.
Mm-hmm.
And in the balanced panel, it's 11,000 users, so that means that it's like 15% of those, so 1,500 maybe.
Okay.
And in the unbalanced panel, it's a lot more. Yeah. Okay, so this user is sort of asking them to do a lot of stuff, and is a bit upset about this. And then another user comes in and says, and this one is not at the risk of being exposed. So this is the tweet token, and then we try to translate it. But I don't think I translated it. So he's basically saying, "Oh no, it's not that bad, ha ha ha." The user not risking exposure, and then he's saying like, "Oh no, you don't know anything about me. My life will be destroyed, basically, idiot," and so on. So this user seemed quite upset about this. So that's what we're using, and then it's a different diff, as I said. So in order to measure, we're going to use measures of hate, xenophobia, and misogyny. And then what I mean then is that we have a broad measure which is hate, and that is directed at anyone. That's just hateful against someone. And then when we say xenophobia, then we mean that this hate is directed towards immigrants or ethnic minorities in society. And when we say misogyny, then it's aimed at a particular gender, women in particular, the hate. So that's what we mean. And then in order to quantify this, we gather text data from Flashback. In particular, we focus on discussions of political topics. So Flashback is divided into subforums covering different topics, so crime, politics, sports, and so on. And then under each of these topics, you have these sort of subforums. So in politics, you have domestic politics, integration, immigration, feminism, and foreign policy, and so on. And each of these subforums is then organized into threads. So each thread discusses a particular topic. So for instance, the forming of the current government or something might be a thread at the moment. So what we do is then that we download all the threads from three of the subforums discussing politics. So it's domestic politics, immigration and the integration of immigrants, and feminism. So we have these three forums. And we have all the posts from starting the start of 2012 until the last day of 2016. And that's basically because we downloaded the data in early 2017. I think it took 2 months, but yeah, that's the data we're using. And we then use this data. We had a research assistant that classified parts of this data, and then we use a simple machine learning technique to generate measures of hate, xenophobia, and misogyny. And then we're going to construct, as I said, a balance panel of individuals that wrote something before the event and after the event. So that's going to be a two-paired balance panel. And then we'll have an unbalanced panel, which is then sort of continuous over time, just demonstrating when someone made a post. So then one observation is a post. So that's why it's unbalanced. Are there any comments on the structure of the data so far? No. Good. Short main findings. Users write fewer hateful and xenophobic posts and fewer posts in general. This means that the share of these decreases at the forum. We do not see an effect on the number of misogynistic posts. What?
Sorry.
Okay.
And there's no practice today, I think.
I don't think so.
Ooh,
We have our question.
I have.
Okay, back on track. Sorry about that.
We are sorry.
That's
Building should be sorry.
it's a first for me. So interesting. Okay, so I think we're here. So I had talked about the balanced and unbalanced panel, and that will then reflect two things. So I think I did not mention it. But when we look at the balance panel, then we will sort of look at individual behavior of these users. So how their behavior change. Yes, thank you. And when we use the unbalanced panel, then it's more the content that a typical reader faces. So how large share of the post that you see as a visitor to the forum is hateful. Right, and I think I started to cover the main findings. So users write fewer hateful and xenophobic posts, as I said. That means that the share decreases among the content for the readers then. We see no effect on the number of misogynistic posts. So users do not write fewer misogynistic posts, but there are also less posts overall. So that means that the share of misogynistic posts increases. We also think that the fact that we see these different effects for hate and xenophobia and misogyny is because basically because of norms among journalists and in society at large. So at least in this time period, there was like a sort of tradition among journalists to expose, in particular, politicians that had expressed something xenophobic. So if you remember, if you're from Sweden, you might remember when Jan Josefsson was out in the asking politicians in the election of 2002 with a hidden camera, like what their actual opinions were. And there have been several subsequent exposures as well. And also, so that we think that's sort of part of the norms in society, but we also think that the laws reflect this norm. So according to law, it's sort of illegal to write something hateful about immigrants or ethnic minorities, because that's hate speech. Or yeah. But the same does not go for women or for women. That's not a crime. But a sexual minority is a crime. You can't write hateful about sexual minorities, but women, that's completely fine, according to the law. Okay, and we're also going to try to look at false information, so the relationship between hate and false information. So we will use a large list of links to fake news sites. Those will be available on my webpage in a month's time, I think. The links, they are not at the moment. And we will also document in the paper where we got the sources for those links, but it's not in the paper yet. So, but we're going to look at that. And basically we think that hate is related to fake news sites to some degree. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in this paper. Why is this interesting then? I don't know if this is as important for you as sociologists, but if you're talking to an economics crowd, this is important at least. So a vast majority in the US thinks that online harassment is a common problem, and 4 out of 10 have been exposed to it themselves. There's also been a recent Pew survey that states that false information online is regarded as a big concern for their country. So it's a survey across 90 countries. And I think 70% or close to 70% of people in the survey agree to the statement that false information online is a major threat to their country.
Is Sweden in that sample of countries?
Oh, I don't remember, unfortunately. I don't want to say yes or no. I don't think so, but I don't want to say. I should check that.
You said you prefer.
It's mostly rich countries. So like developed countries if you want. Thank you. And that's the second then to climate change. So climate change is the only other major threat that is considered more a threat. Hate and harassment is also quite common in online discussions and discussion cultures, in particular anonymous ones. So it's typically linked to sort of specific groups in society. So it's a lot of sexism and racism, as demonstrated. This is a former PhD student in economics that looks at hateful writing among economists at the anonymous Forum for Economists, basically, that documents this. So there's a difference between how men and women are described in these discussions, male and female researchers. And there's another paper as well. And then, as I said, they target specific groups. So real world consequences, we have a bit here as well. So it can lead to hate crimes. This is a recent paper in economics that looks at sort of access to Facebook and hate crimes in society. I think it's in France and Italy, if I remember correctly. There's also a theoretical paper in economics that argues that hate can crowd out information, can silence specific groups. So this is sort of an information problem then. And it can also lead to sick leave and job losses and so on. However, so I'm not here going to tell you, you might think that I'm going to tell you that we should not have anonymity online or something like that, but that's not what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that we're going to look at sort of the cost side of anonymity, but there are also benefits of being anonymous. So you can discuss certain topics and make certain controversial statements, perhaps that is not possible to do if you are not anonymous, because there are certain norms in society. And that might be cost, sort of benefits of anonymity. So we're not going to look at that today. I think that we're going to try to do something like that in the future. So we're going to look at the costs today to sort of get at least more information about what policy we should have on related to anonymity in online environments. So this is related literature, and this is also almost only in economics. So that's why I'm here partly. So if you have related research in sociology that you think we should cite, then please send those citations to us so we can incorporate them, hopefully, if we think they are related. So there's a theory paper, quite recent, that sort of looks at, I don't know how much economic theory you know, but basically we put this theory into our context, and then we argue that hate is like a public bad, so like pollution of discussions. And then you can sort of think of users at Flashback as, so it's a principal agent model, if that tells you anything. So basically we have a social planner, so like the state as a principal. So the state wants informed discussions of politics. And then we have users. And if users then care about their public image in this setting, then they will decrease their pollution of the content, their hate, when they are not anonymous, if they care about their social image. And that also relates back to the different effects we see on misogyny and xenophobia. So basically, if xenophobia is more, if there are norms against that in society that are sort of more strongly enforced than misogynistic norms, then we should see more of an effect in xenophobia rather than misogyny. And then there are some other related papers. So there are some papers on social media and political actions in society, in economics, social media and fake news, social media and job environment. This is the paper I talked about by the PhD in economics. And then we have also two related empirical situations in economics. So Hansen et al., they look at Federal Reserve in the US, and then at a certain point in time, the notes from their meetings become publicly available. So notes were always taken, but suddenly then they are available to the public. And they look at how that affects the discussions regarding what policy rate they should set, the interest rate. And then they see sort of more informed discussions when they are public, but they are also more coherent in the discussion. And then finally, this paper, then Burstein et al., that's a real world experiment. So I think they go out and knock on people's door before and after Donald Trump was elected as president, and ask them to donate, I think, to some charity. And then they are basically more likely to donate when they are not anonymous once Donald Trump has been elected to an organization that want to constrain immigration to the US. So that's the related literature that we cover so far. And as I said, send me citations if you have them. Okay, so now we're going to, that was sort of the introduction. Now we're going to get into the details a bit more. So as I said, we have 3 subforums from Flashback from 2012 to end of 2016. And those are then feminism, immigration, and domestic politics. And each of the observation in this data is a post by a user. And then there are threads with topics, and the posts are organized chronologically within these threads. So that's the main difference to Reddit. So if you have been to Reddit, you can upvote the best response. But at Flashback, it's sort of just chronological. First post first, second post second, and so on. And then in order to get these measures of hate and xenophobia and so on, we employed a research assistant that manually coded a random subset of these threads. So we took basically 100 random threads from each of these 3 subforums. And then we asked her to take the first 12 posts. So that's the first page you see on the forum. And then the last 5 and classify those as hateful and towards whom they were hateful. And we also have threats and aggression and political opinions or political, if they express attitudes towards or against a political party.
For the manually coding of these text pieces, have you had the coding manual? So how you would classify hate, because it can be quite ambiguous, right? So it can be very implicit. And I was wondering whether you also covered this implicit dimension or whether you mainly went with certain buzzwords or combinations of words, and whether you also incorporated emojis, because what was observable on social media a lot is that people at one point, because also Instagram and Twitter and all these platforms had at one specific time, they employed automatic hate detection software, and then people moved towards using emojis and combinations of emojis to express themselves so that they won't be caught by these algorithms. So I was okay.
So let's try to get all of that. So basically, you can use emojis, but it's not that common. It's sort of more old school in that sense. So if you look at, like, if we go back to these examples, so here's one emoji, but that's quite uncommon. It's more like text typically.
Text, okay.
Yeah, typically. And I don't think you can have images, but you can sort of provide a link to an image or to a news article and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But we only focus on text. We have not treated the emojis in any way.
So it was one research assistant who coded it.
Yes, right. So that was the other question. So basically, we have instructions. We had instructions there. They are written down. They have been translated, and they are in the online appendix to the paper at the end. We also have taken 300 of these. So we have 4,040 classified posts by her. We have taken 300 of those and have a second research assistant reclassify them independently. And we're not deciding how we should present the overlap, but basically there's a quite strong positive correlation between all 3 measures between the 2.
Did you just calculate intercoder reliability, what the alpha is, or?
What was the name, sir?
Intercoder reliability, and it's usually an alpha.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're going to want, I think, above 0.7 or something like that at a minimum.
Okay, we'll see what we have then. 0.7, you said?
I think so. You should check on that for yourself. It's been a while since I've done something like this.
Yeah.
I think it also varies by field and by like what do you actually coding. So if it's a more complicated construct, then it's the lower.
I will look into it. Because I'm going to update the discussion on the appendix on this part.
Yeah, and maybe you're getting to this, but after you run everything else through the lasso, do you then go through and check have the manual coder go back and try to recode the automatically coded things?
No.
Okay.
So what we did was we took her classification and then we run this logistic lasso on hate, xenophobia, and misogyny. And then we test it towards our data. So we have like 70% we tested on the other 30%. And basically, so the model does not work that well for hate. It works okay for misogyny and xenophobia. So we're going to have some measurement error. At least for the when we look at the binary outcomes, then measurement error is going to bias our results towards 0, because we're going to falsely classify hateful observations as non-hateful and the other way around. So that's going to imply that our bias is going to be towards 0, as long as it's not related to the sort of the diff in diff estimate. So there should not be a particular trend for the exposed users over time. Then we have a concern. But related to your point, it's sort of hard to change your language as a subgroup if you want to discuss with the other group, because you need everyone to understand. So it's if some are changing their language, it's more likely that everyone is going to adapt their language. You see?
But if there is an overtime trend and you anyways, like...
Yeah, that's going to be solved by the difference in difference. It's if there's a different trend between the exposed and the non-exposed, that's going to be a concern. Yes.
There is a question on Zoom.
Yes.
By Louise Koch.
Yes, thank you. Until now, my questions also relates a bit to what do you define as hate and what do you define as misogyny? And yeah, the second question would be if you code your comments in Swedish, and if you have a list of Swedish buzzwords or word combinations where you say, okay, this is clearly misogynistic and this not.
So what's going to, so the logistic cluster, what that does is that it picks words that predict hate well. So we have some certain words that predict hate well, and then we have some other words that predict xenophobia well, and some other words that predict misogyny well. So that's how the logistic cluster works. We basically have all the words, like it's a large matrix, words on the x-axis, and then the classified posts on the y-axis, and then words that predict hateful content well are going to be picked by the model. And we also have weights for how common they are in the hateful comments compared to the total, how common they are in total, basically. It's the inverse, what's it called? The term frequency inverse. Yeah. You know, it's really good because I never get these questions when I present to economists. Actually, true. So related to the instructions, I'm not going to cover those in the presentation, but basically we told her it was quite open, but we told her to only classify things that were really like that she deemed as hateful. Like if she was unsure, then it should be left as not hateful, basically. So she should have been conservative in her classification in that sense. That were her instructions.
Yeah, if I may have a follow-up question on this. We're conducting quite a similar task now and have found that the toxicity score of the Google API classifies some Twitter comments as hateful, which we, coding them manually, don't classify as misogynistic. So my question would be, if this intercoder coefficient you mentioned before is really applicable, as classifying misogyny, for example, is super subjective.
Yeah, so okay, so in terms of conceptually thinking about this, then you can think of sort of if we provided all this data to all people in the world, then we will get a definition corresponding to, let's just stick to Sweden then. We have all people in Sweden, and then sort of if we want consensus on if this is hateful or not, then we would have all people read all of these posts and classify them, and then we would take sort of a measure based on that if they are hateful or not. But we can't do that. So what we have is basically we had one research assistant because we wanted her to do, we had quite specific instructions to her, and we wanted her to collect additional measures because we wanted to use this data in the future as well. So that's what it is. But then sort of the overlap is going to measure some degree of the agreeability between these two. But in the end, no matter what we do, we will have some measurement error irrespective of the overlap between these two. But as I said, at least for the dummy outcomes, like when it's a 0-1 variable, it will bias our estimates towards 0 always. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, there's another question on Zoom, and I'm just gonna piggyback on that because did you mention how the proportion of hate, xenophobic, and misogynistic posts that were in the total data set? And there has been the question of example words that are good predictors of each of these categories.
Yes, I can give you the example. I mean, we have some tables with the words that predict well, so they are quite few. So I can show you those tables. They are in Swedish, and OR has fallen off because I have not updated the. It's a LaTeX problem if you have worked in that program, typesetting program. So I have not done that. So OR is going to fall off, and it's in Swedish. I can show it in a few seconds. What was the first question?
Just how the proportion was of kind of like labeled posts versus all posts. Like how much of the posts contain hate and xenophobia.
Yeah, so it depends on if we look at the predicted. So I'm going to show you the share of hateful posts based on the predicted model. And that's slightly lower than the one from the research assistant, basically. We have the share from the research assistant in the online appendix, but we're focusing on the predicted outcomes because it's easier when we do the diff in diff to just have one measure. Okay, so let's go to the very end then, and then I can show you the words. So some of them are. This is for the general hate, and this is the model that does not work as well in terms of predictions. So some of them make more sense than others. This is rån, by the way, so robbery. So here they was fallen off. And I have pathetis, parasite, and you can see that some of them are related to sort of ethnic minorities, so Muslims, Arabs, and so on. And I don't know how much you know about logistic cluster, but basically the larger the coefficient here is, the more weight is put towards making the post being, it's more likely to be hateful the larger the coefficient is, if the word is included. But then it's also weighted, as I said. So
one quick question: why has Arab such a low coefficient and Muslims such a high coefficient? Is this just kind of like that people more talk just about Muslims and less about Arabs here in Sweden?
I suppose so, but I don't know. I mean, it's. In this sense, it's sort of a black box to us. I mean, we apply this formula, we get these words back. And in the end, what we really care about is how good it predicts hate in the data. As I said, this model is not so great. The other two are okay. Yes.
I also have to ask a clarification question, because if I were a user and I would write a post where I talk about Muslim population in a positive way, or I try to talk about it in a more neutral way.
Yeah.
Will that I use the word Muslim already increase the likelihood of my post for being hateful? Because this is not really what you want to detect, right?
Well, basically we want as good prediction as possible. We don't want that, but I mean, we might pick that up with this model, but that will include, and that will induce measurement error.
But then you
so I should say
rather generated a measure that detects topics that are more prone to have like hateful
that is true to some degree
contributions,
but as long as the prediction works, again the most important thing is the prediction part, but you're right. I had one thing I wanted to say related to that as well. Right, so we tried to use pairs of words as well, because that they can get sort of positive, negative, but that predicted a lot worse.
Yeah, but this is why I was asking about the implicit dimensions earlier. This is what I meant with that. Combinations of words, and combinations of different.
Yeah, we tried that. It did not work well.
But I mean, one thing that you could argue is kind of because the intercept is already like relatively low, means that kind of like posts were already like tilted against being flagged as, in this case, hate. So you would use like more, you would need more of these words in order to have it actually classified as hate.
Yeah,
it's also like the fact that all of the coefficients are positive suggests that it's sort of the most common way is to purpose not to be hateful. Yes, sorry.
What do you think that million relates to hate speech?
It could be like miljonprogram. So basically these words are stemmed. I don't know, I hope you're familiar with that. So the end has fallen off. So this is latte, if you know Swedish, most likely. No, okay. It's basically a racial slur for ethnic minorities. Someone with dark hair and dark skin. This is misogyny. So you can see, and this actually works quite well, this prediction, but the words are a bit strange sometimes. This is probably Beatrice Ask, the former politician for the moderate party, we think. We can't think of anything else.
Wow.
So that's,
Official.
yeah.
Super.
Yeah. So it's like a few entries which loads heavily on that one, which is mentioned a lot, and that have been deemed misogynistic.
Clue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's like
Queen of Blue.
yeah, maybe or something. You know, it's like the elite that are all feminists. I don't know. If I'm speculating now.
It's also interesting to see that kind of like feminism like loads very, very faintly, and the bad feminists load relatively high.
Yeah. Yeah, and these words, yeah. I mean, this is basically, yeah, young Swedish girl that is not mature enough yet. Yeah, it's being under the legal. It depends on where in the country you are, but in classical terms, it's being below the sexual age. Like you can't, you're not allowed to have sex with adults when you're 40s, and you're most likely a woman, a girl. So it's like, yeah.
Just for clarification, is this being estimated across all three subfora, or is this just, are you using the feminism subfora?
No, it's across all three. Yeah. I'm going to show you the relationship. So basically, both the data from the research assistant, the coded data, and the predicted data, then the misogynistic hate is mostly in the feminist forum, and the xenophobic hate is mostly in the immigration forum. And then the master politics, it's like, it's actually more informative, I think, but yeah. And this is xenophobic hate, and here you can see quite many of the false off. So this is Rowan again, and then this is group våldtäkt. I don't remember what this is. I think it's as well. I don't remember. Yeah, but you can see.
So what's the difference between the first table that you're showing in this one?
So this one is on the first one. That's hate against anyone.
Okay.
This is hate against foreigners or ethnic minorities.
Okay.
So basically, in the data
So
from
the hate category then should completely absorb like both of the two categories.
No,
So,
like it can be hateful against someone else as well, like some person or some other group.
but it doesn't
it's all-
include other categories.
No,
Okay.
not in the data from the research assistant. In the predicted data, and that's not the case because each model is separate. So then, but we look at the correlation from the predicted data. And basically what you see is there's a strong overlap between hate and xenophobic hate and hate and misogyny, but there's almost no correlation or if anything, a negative correlation between hate against sort of xenophobic hate and misogynistic hate. So, yeah. But in the data from research assistant, they are sort of subgroups of the large hate thing. Good, can we proceed? Otherwise I will not have time for myself. This is really good, by the way. But I also want to show you some of the results. As you see, I have some slides left, so, okay. Yes, and as I said, we have some additional outcomes from the research assistant. Threats, they are too few to do anything with. Aggression seems quite hard to predict well, even harder than hate in general, I think. Political opinion, that I think we'll use for a future project. So this is the sort of distribution of hate, distribution of entries across users. So this is which percentile the user is in, and this is then how many posts you have written. So you can see many of the users have written only one post, or like 4, so that's quite few. And then at the top, like they write a lot. So it's heavily skewed towards a few users. And I think it's quite common that is the case at all, yeah.
I think in the population of users that we are working in, it's not that much a case actually.
Okay.
And many users like it's a very fewer share of users that doesn't post the only ones. So
Okay.
a lot of users on the platform. on Flashback.
But yeah, maybe it's because you have newer data also.
Or maybe because
or-
you have way more data and
Yeah.
these users might be like very different from the whole platform.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is all the data from 2012 and 2016.
Okay,
So this is not a selected sample. It's these three forums.
But it is for those free subforums.
Yes, it is for those three subforums. And then we do the same thing. So this is the number of hateful posts. So you can see most have no hateful posts at all. Few have one, and then it sort of again just spikes. And it's the same thing for the share. So like 50% have no hateful posts written, and at the top it's 100%. We also do a simple correlation between the number of posts by the user and the share of hateful posts, and it's just 0 basically.
What's the total number of users? I'm just wondering how many people are in the 99.9 percentile.
It's the next slide basically.
Okay, great.
So this is the balance panel, and this is the unbalanced panel. So this is all data we have. So then you have 48,000 users. And the balance panel, then we have 11,159. And this is then 2 time periods, before and after. So it's the number of observations is the number of users times 2. We're going to look at, these are the measures we're going to focus on. So we're going to have the standardized number of entries, standardized number of hateful entries, number of xenophobic entries, and number of misogynistic entries. And when I say standardized, then it's standardized at the exposed, non-exposed level. So that means that it's 0 mean 1 standard deviation at each exposed, non-exposed group, basically. So it's standardized per group. Then we also have the share of hate, share of xenophobia, and share of misogyny. And for the unbalanced panel, the same measures. What we want to show you is basically that they are not very different, these two populations, in terms of the share of hate.
what does it mean?
It means that they write, in terms of their hateful writing, they are quite equal, the balanced panel and the unbalanced panel. So if we want to draw inference for all of the users at Flashback, these users do not seem completely unrepresentative. So this is the population. This is not a random sample of the population, but it seems to be quite similar in terms of the hate they write. And then we also do a similar thing, but here we look at the balanced panel prior to the reform date and the users that drop out afterwards. Because basically, like we have the balanced panel, and then we have some users. Those users, they sort of exist before and after, but we also have users that exist before that fall out of the data and that do not continue to write. And we compare those to the balanced panel here prior to the September 10, 2014. And again, you can see sort of they are quite similar on all measures, even the registration date, except for this one. If they, I should change this. Sorry, this is if they are exposed or not. So if they are registered before March 2007, and you can see, as I said here, about 15% in this data, about 8% in the unbalanced panel. So it suggests that these actually stay. The exposed users actually stay to a large degree at the forum, but it's probably because they are sort of invested in the platform from the beginning. Okay. Empirical strategy, so it's just a difference in difference. This is the outcome level, so it's either going to be the standardized number of posts, hateful as well, or the share. And then we have those exposed, so those are before March 2007 times post time period. And then this beta coefficient, that's the one we're interested in. So that's the difference in difference estimate. And then we have the main effects as well. And the standards will be clustered at the individual user level in the panel data. And then we'll get to the unbalanced panel later on. Okay, so basically we see that exposed users, they decreased their standardized number of hateful entries by 0.7 standard deviations. No effect on the share of hate. 0.56 decrease in the number of standardized number of xenophobic entries. No effect on the share. Misogyny, standardized number, no effect. Share misogyny, no effect. Number of entries in total decreased by 0.6 standard deviations. And I should point out this is measured without measurement error, since that is not predicted by the models. Okay, so basically it seems to be that the exposed users decrease their number of hateful and number of xenophobic entries. And then we look at, oh, sorry, this is it just to show you that this is a new table, so that's why I forgot it. So basically, this shows you that the effect is driven by a decrease in the exposed group from the pre to the post period. So you can see that everything decreases except misogyny then, basically, in terms of the standardized number of things. And as it's standardized to being 0, then it will be as positive before as it is as negative afterwards. And this is just the number of entries. So you can see that there are minor decreases among the non-exposed, but the effect is mainly driven by the decrease in the exposed group. And this is done. So here we look at the number of standardized entries, and then we divide the sum. So if you remember, I showed you that many users had no amount of written hate, and then only a few had stood for a very large share. So here we divide the sample into the bottom 2/3 of pre-event hate and the top 1/3 pre-event hate. So basically the first column here, that's the bottom 2/3 of the distribution. So bottom 2/3 of the sample in terms of the share of hate prior to the event. And this is the top 1/3. And then we do the same thing for xenophobia and misogyny. And then you can see that the effect is basically driven by those with in the top 1/3 of the hateful distribution prior to the event. Similar pattern for xenophobia. And for misogyny, basically they are at the average, which reflects the fact that having writing a misogynistic post is not positively related to writing a xenophobic post. So they should be on the average if the effect is not driven by them. Okay, so basically, if you have the effect seems to be driven by those with hateful post prior to the event and xenophobic post prior to the event. These figures are not what you might think. So this is not the trend figures. This is like decreasing the amount of data around the cutoff of March 2007, sorry. So basically here we use all observations, and then we take 5 years prior to March 2007 registration date in terms of registration date, 5 years post. So if you have registered an account up until March 2012, I suppose then, and 5 years earlier. And then we gradually decrease that to sort of get closer to this. And then we will lose observation, so we lose precision, and we do it quite quickly, as you see, but the coefficients remain stable, which is sort of reassuring, at least. So this is the standardized number of entries. This is the standardized number of hateful entries. This is xenophobia, and this is misogyny. So the coefficient seems quite stable, but we lose power quickly, unfortunately. But yeah, that's the reality. Okay, that is all I'm going to show you for the balance panel. Now we're going to look at the unbalanced panel, and then in order to count the number of entries, we need to collapse the data at some dimension. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to count the number of entries by group per week in the data. So 1 week is one observation then. And then we have the number of entries by the exposed users and the non-exposed users. And that's this Y bar TG. And then we take the difference between the exposed and the non-exposed. Then we get the time series difference of the difference. And then we can take that on a dummy of the post period after September 10, 2014. That's going to give the difference in difference estimate, but based on a time series. And the reason we do this like a time series instead of 2 is because then we can take the autocorrelation of the standard errors into account. So we use New West standard errors with 4 lags. So that's 1 month of autocorrelation in the standard errors. And then we also look at the share here. So we're going to focus more on the share here, but we're also going to look at the standardized number of hateful entries. Am I going too fast or is it okay? So good. Right. So again, we see a negative effect for the standardized number of hateful entries. Now we also see a decrease in the share of hateful entries by 0.13 standard deviation, percentage points. Decrease in the number of xenophobic entries. Also increase in the share of xenophobic entries. No significant effect on the standard number of misogynistic entries, but the share of misogynistic entries increases actually by 3.3 percentage points. And we also see a decrease in the standardized number of entries overall. So I'm going to put this decrease in the share of xenophobic entries and the increase in misogynistic entries into the context of being a reader at the forum. So we know from data from Alexa that the typical user sees, so they look at I think it's 7 pages per day. So if there are 12 posts per page, that amounts to 84 posts overall. By a computation of the share of xenophobic entries, 13 of those are xenophobic per day prior to the event. The treatment, I should change it. The effect in any case implies that after the event, the user saw around 11 xenophobic posts per day instead, this 13 out of 84. And if we do a similar thing for misogyny, then we go from 12 misogynistic posts to 15. So I mean, xenophobic content for sure seem to decrease. Misogynistic content, and it depends on if you think of it as a reader, the share you consume, or if you think of it as the amount of content available with. Because no effect on the total amount of misogynistic posts. Okay, you had a lot more questions about the data, but that's good because this is like when I present to economists, I get a lot of questions on these results table, and very few questions about the data constructor. So today it's the other way around. So it's good. Okay. So as I said in the beginning, this theoretical paper by Gleiser from 2005 suggests that there might be a relationship between hate and false information, not in online environments, just in society at large. And this is the empirical paper I talked about earlier about the Federal Reserve and when the notes were publicly available or not. So anonymity might also be related to false information to some degree. So we want to look into this by having this list of fake news sites, links to fake news sites. And then we just take the list and then search all the posts for that link, basically. And if it's detected, then it's a 1 in that cell. And again, we collapse it at the weekly level, take the difference between the two groups, as we did before. But before we look into that, this is the question. I think you had a question before about the distribution. So you can see that basically hate, or all hate, it's quite evenly distributed across the 3 forums, but it's a bit more in the immigration forum. Xenophobia, immigration forum, basically mostly. Misogyny, mostly the feministic forum. So hate sort of belongs in the topic forum that corresponds to it. So the reason I showed you this is because now we're going to do the analysis by subforum as well. So first we look at the overall effect, and then we see a minor decrease in the share of links to fake news sites. And this effect is in particular driven by the change in the decrease in the domestic politics forum and the immigration forum. No effect in the forum of feministic topics. So based on this, it does not seem to be the case that links to fake news is affected by anonymity, but rather by hate. Since we do not really see, like, if anything, we should have seen an increase here, but like there's no negative coefficient here, since there's no real decrease in the hate in the feminist forum, right? We see the decrease in the domestic politics forum and the immigration forum, because that's where the xenophobic and hateful posts are most prominently. Here, where we have misogynistic posts in the feminist forum, then if anything, it's an increase in the hate, and then we see no effect on the links to fake news sites. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, so yeah, the links to fake news sites, it's not the best measure either. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering because now I want to ask about the coefficients. Can you maybe talk a bit whether this is substantive or so what does it, because they look very small.
Yes.
So what does it mean?
So
exactly?
basically it means, so they are quite rare. It's a reflection of that, mostly. I don't remember what the mean is. So this is the difference between the two groups, the mean here. So that's not really relevant. I can look it up. I think it's also mostly relevant to put it in terms of the standard deviation, if I recall correctly. But
yeah, I wanted to ask
Yeah.
about the substantive of the coefficients. Yeah.
Yeah, we can put it into more context. Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't remember, but it's not like, it's relatively quite large, but it's also from a low baseline level, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, the relatively large, I think. It's,
Yeah. But as I said, it's from a low level, so that makes the relative thing a bit less relevant also, but
yeah.
sure, that's a good comment. Okay, I'm almost done otherwise, even though we had a fire alarm. So, I have typically presented this in 1 hour and 1 hour and 15 minutes, so that's maybe why I'm done already. But let's go through the conclusion, and then if you have additional questions, we can take them afterwards, perhaps. So basically, conclusion. Decrease in anonymity in terms of this being exposed, risking exposure, decreases the hateful and xenophobic individuals writing or content creation at the forum. We do not see any change in the amount of posted misogyny in terms of the number of posts. This implies that there will be less hate and xenophobia consumed by readers in terms of the share of xenophobic and hateful content, but there's a higher share of misogyny. Hate also seems to be potentially linked to false information in terms of fake news then. So there seems to be less false information on immigration issues, but no change on the other topics. Why do we see these different effects for xenophobia and misogyny? So we're trying to argue based on this economic model that journalists had previously publicly exposed individuals primarily when they were stating something xenophobic. So there's a larger risk of being exposed then, but there's also seems to be, like, based on laws in Sweden and so on, that there's sort of a norm against xenophobia in Swedish society, but not necessarily against misogyny to the same degree at least. And one indication of this is then the Swedish law, that and it's also the same in most other countries, that gender is not grounds for hate crime, unlike ethnic minorities or race. We're also going to try to do more research on benefits in the future. So sort of sensitive topics, is that affected by this event? And in particular, I think we should look at this effect on political slant in these discussions. So that's quite easy. And then we can also do just a descriptive paper of the relationship with this hateful language and so on. So,
When you say the political slant is quite easy, how would you measure it?
yeah, so I would take data from the Swedish Riksdag. like you did for the US Senate. Then you have a lot of statements by party representatives. So you know the part of the candidate that speaks in Riksdag, you know what they say. You train a model on that. And then we have data, as I showed you, on if they expressed attitudes towards or against a political party, or at least a group of political parties in our data. So then we can see if it predicts well in our setting based on the data from the research assistant. And then we have a measure of political slant from the Swedish Riksdag that we can apply to flashback. And then we can test it with this.
Okay.
So that's what we'll do. And then we can also correlate it to all these other measures and so on. Yes.